Ladies and gentlemen, I'm David Zachary Mazzei, and this is the first dyno test of the world's only turbocharged peripheral port 5 rotor, the MF5 Superlight. The introduction of this video is dedicated to the phenomenal guys over at Excite for doing such a fantastic job on the PPF. I hope that you enjoy this video, and I appreciate all of your support. So as you can see here, we're rolling in the car on Jim's dyno at Motivation Motorsports in Alabama. And rolling it in means just making sure that the straps are tight, that everything feels good, getting the car up to temperature, and getting a feel for the dyno and the drivetrain, make sure everything is going to look good and feel good. After we get the car up to speed and I'm going through the gears a little bit, the next thing I'm going to do is roll into fourth gear for the first time. All right, what we got, Jim?
So what we're experiencing here, if you look at the blue run, early on when the transition from essentially no boost to ramping into boost, the blue run shows some clutch slip. And then it catches itself right here at about 6,700, 6,800 RPM, and we see almost identical runs out at the top. The red run is after you put heat in it that first time, the clutch is able to go ahead and stick, and the power is realistic all the way through this mid-range area. So the blue run is just clutch slip from early on at the onset of boost until it decides to catch itself. The red run is a legit horsepower and torque number based on what the car's capable of with the tune that you had in it.
So it's insane the sound that it makes and the amount of power that came from that fourth gear. We thought that it was blowing through the clutch. It has a new clutch in it from Tilton, which is supposed to hold a lot of power. We were pretty convinced that there was something wrong with the clutch or there was something holding the engine back, but it turns out that we were actually just blowing the tires off, which was hard to imagine because we were only seeing around 4.5 psi. Okay, so guys, we got the limiter set at 8,800 and it starts pulling timing and adding fuel right up on the limiter about 100 RPMs before. And Jim is saying we're starting to roll off at about 7,800 anyways.
That's correct.
Okay.
If we look at what you've done from earlier on, as boost increased, the peak power point seems to come up every couple 300 RPM. So if we were to look at the first pull that you made, we made peak power much earlier. When you finally had, let's see here, you added a pound of boost and it went up 90 horsepower from the first pull to
the duty cycle on the boost controller. And we're now going to try approximately 55% duty cycle. And we're going to apply a little bit of a ramp where we're going to go from 45%, which we think is probably going to give us 7, maybe 8 pounds of boost. And we're going to ramp it to 55% in hopes that we get 8.5, maybe 9 pounds of boost when we climb over that 7,750 RPMs where the torque curve is starting to lean off. So we just finished that run that we were predicting we were going to go to around 9 pounds. We're right around 8.6 to 9 pounds at the very top. We made it progressive when peak torque was dropping at 7750. That's where we started tapering the boost up, smoothing it up. And so now we're getting 9 PSI. I'm seeing a really rich air fuel up there, like a 10-to-1 air fuel ratio. So we can definitely pull some more fuel. And so what were you saying, Jim?
The changes that you made, we can obviously see here in the dyno. The red run was the previous at the older boost level, and the green run is the current boost level change. So obviously out here towards the red line, you can see a significant difference in performance. This shows 145 horsepower difference from that boost change at red line. And you can see that that grows from peak power here at 7,600 all the way out.
So what we're going to do is 3 things. We're going to raise the boost duty cycle again, more progression on the top, leaving the duty cycle coming into it the same. And then we're going to lean off the air fuel a little bit closer to the target, which is 11.0, because we're 1 full point away. And then we're also going to maybe add a tiny bit of timing on the top after 750. I don't know how much more power we're going to be able to make. I'm only concerned about the curve. I want to see the curve be a little more peaky. I want to see it make its peak power at 8,400. The reason why we're not going to be able to make a whole lot more power is because we're probably going to have to switch the wastegate springs to another size up in order to achieve that, unless we had CO2 or a 4-port controller, which then things get convoluted. And we also are probably going to blow the damn tires off the car if we run a bigger spring, because we won't be able to run any less than that. So I think, like, if you ignore the boost numbers, this is an incredible amount of horsepower for a 2,600 pound car. I'd love to see 1,000, but I want the adjustability. So well, let's just see where we can get with the duty cycle. The other thing that I noticed on the 4-rotor on this dyno, which is an inertia roller dyno, is 4th gear, which is not quite a 1-to-1 yet. 5th gear is the 1-to-1. We're not doing the 1-to-1 because we don't want to ton of wheel speed and load until we dial it in. But I did notice that we picked up about 1 to 3 PSI going from 4th gear to 5th gear on the last car. So that could certainly increase the overall power numbers. And we'll do a 5th gear later once we get this all cleaned up and dialed in. Not to mention, we'll have the progression of the turbine coming online when we're flat shifting between gears. So right now, we're just trying to get the pulls out of the way, get all those 3 things dialed up, and then we'll come back and flat shift the transmission and see what we can do. So. All right, so now we're going to go for a 5th gear run. But before we do that, I want to address some of the comments that I've seen where people love to say, this sounds nothing like a V10 Formula One. Well, you spoke too soon. So I want you to check out this clip of a V10 F1 car, and then I want you to just enjoy the sound of this 5-rotor. Oh my God, I can't believe it. So insane. We hit 1,000?
1,053 with a...
Wow. Is that not exactly the same number we made on the 4-rotor at 22? It was 1,053.
I don't know, I can look back, but I don't have any way to measure the boost on what it was before, but... Was that 11 pounds? Is all it made?
I don't know. 11 PSI? 1,000 horsepower on 11 pounds of boost. Wow. Holy. The run?
Weight escape plane, 1.5 foot.
During the run?
Yeah.
Like under boost?
Like when you let out, like that was the first
Oh, that's what we heard?
Yeah, that was the first one.
Oh my God.
I said that earlier, I was like, I don't know if they're opening. And he goes, they aren't open yet. That run,
Holy crap.
That's what you call sending it.
What you're seeing here is a 3, 4, 5th gear pull, which loads the turbo a little harder, and obviously it makes more power than a static single gear run. So we're seeing at peak 1120 wheel horsepower in the middle top of 5th gear.
Wow, I cannot believe that this thing is making over 1100 wheel horsepower on as little as 12.5 pounds of boost. Absolutely incredible. The car flat shifts so nicely on the Hollinger MXT transmission. I do have some more fine tuning that I need to do on the flat shifting and the tune itself. I only had 2 days to balance this whole tune out, which is not quite enough time to get everything exactly where I want. So we're going to go back to the dyno again. We're going to work on a few other things, but first I just want to say I am so thankful for everyone that has supported this project. I consider this a tremendous success in this experiment. Of course, we have a long way to go from here, so I don't want to count my chickens before they hatch, and I don't want to get too confident with anything. Again, this is an experiment and this is a prototype, but I want you guys to remember what the intention was of this project. This is an experiment and a test. So we're going to go really extreme, and that's why we have the peripheral ports and the large turbocharger with such a race car design, because we need to see what a 5-rotor characteristically is capable of. We need to see like what the extreme characteristics of are of this motor. And then from there, we can step it down to a street port or a naturally aspirated engine with less RPM and less power, but have more drivability and things like that. So one thing that I notice and that you guys see is that the torque starts to fall off on the very top end a little bit before where we want our red line to be. One of the major benefits of a peripheral port engine is that you can increase your volumetric efficiency on the top end and pick up much more horsepower. But we're kind of being limited on that because of the fact that the engine is nosing over on the top. So I'm not going to suggest that that's because of the porting was done incorrectly, but I think what's going on is that the compressor wheel, as large as this turbo is, when you're trying to supply an engine of this volume, the compressor is actually struggling to become efficient at that high RPM. So although we could raise the boost and probably make 1600 horsepower in the same operating range that we are, I would like to be able to keep the same horsepower but carry it to a higher RPM, which is going to give us better reliability. And so what's happening in a peripheral port engine is that the exhaust is building up back pressure against the turbine wheel because it requires drive energy to spin that compressor at a higher speed when it becomes inefficient. And then in a peripheral port, because the overlap between the intake being open at the same time as the exhaust, it creates an effective vacuum where the exhaust gets recirculated back through the intake, a percentage of it, which is responsible for why the volumetric efficiency falls off on the top end. You're basically re-ingesting inert gas, which is diluting your oxygen density. So we're going to try to quantify this by going back to the dyno again, and this time we're going to install an exhaust manifold back pressure sensor so we can really get an idea of the back pressure. Particularly on a high overlap engine, you want to keep it much lower than a general engine that would maybe have a 2-to-1 drive pressure. And we're going to see if that's really what's going on the top. Then we're going to get down to what is the cause of that. And because we have a compressor wheel speed sensor, it is showing that our compressor speed is a little bit faster than what we want it to do, especially at that high RPM. And I think that's where it could be more optimal. We might need to put a 112 or 115 millimeter wheel on this turbo, which would take some work. And that's something we can look at later on. I'm hoping to speak with some engineers on that at Garrett and some other various turbocharger manufacturers to see if that's something that we can do and if it would really truly help increase the volumetric efficiency of the engine. But that being said, there was hardly anything else that I can complain about. For the amount of power that it's making, we're approximately at a 1-to-1 power to weight ratio already if we're considering it flywheel horsepower like the rest of the supercars, and this thing should be an absolute weapon. So let's just try to dial it in better. I want to focus on balancing my EGTs, getting the timing curve smoother, and finding the mean best EGT and torque. And I'm going to need more time on the dyno to do that. And again, also trying to work on transient throttle and deceleration and all of those things, which are, all of this is brand new because there is no base map for an engine like this where we designed everything essentially, like the intake and the exhaust and all of it. So I would say that all in all, for only having 2 days on the dyno and working tightly with just a small crew, I am super thrilled with how this went. I want to thank Jim again at the dyno for helping out. And I really appreciate all of you watching and subscribing to my videos. And I'm hoping to do some more of this in the near future. Again, I'm David Zachary Mazzei with Mazzei Formula, and this is the MF5 Superlight project. I hope that you guys enjoyed this experiment.